such as yourself. What's
Yeah.
your story?
Yeah.
Because you come out of the Rumi line, as
Yeah.
I understand it.
Yeah. Well, you can't go to Sheikh school and get a degree. It's conferred upon someone by someone in the lineage who has the authority and respect to confer it on another. And it usually means, I would say, two things. One is that it suggests a certain level of spiritual realization and maturity on the one hand. So one has been through the process of the Sufi process. But at the same time, it also represents a certain capacity to communicate the teaching, to take some responsibility for the education of other souls, and to be in some sense also a manager of this process. So it's a relatively rare title in our tradition, and so it's all those things. It's a whole package of responsibilities.
Thank you for that. I'm also curious about the whole notion of whirling dervishes. This is part of the vernacular of Western life too,
Yes.
and I've participated in a couple of zikars through the years on Rumi's birthday. In Sedona, there were a couple of people who were just exquisite at reciting the poetry who would put these events on, and I enjoyed them and did some of the whirling myself, without, of course, understanding the nature of it, only the experience of it. What is the nature, the origins of whirling and the purpose of whirling?
All right. Whirling exists in a number of forms. It predates Rumi, but it took a new form with Rumi and with his teacher, Shams of Tabriz. Shams encouraged this whirling, and during the time when Rumi was alive, the occasions on which they came together with music and poetry and joy and worship and whirling, sometimes it would go on for days and days. It was a very spontaneous but deeply spiritual activity. Shortly thereafter, and really through the knowledge conferred by Shams to Rumi's son, Khaled, it became more ceremonial. And in the ceremony is like a living cosmology and alchemy. And it has so many features, but let's start with the whirling itself. In order to whirl as we whirl in Mevlevi tradition, one has to, first of all, be able to turn around a still axis, which is the left leg. So whirling in our tradition requires the development of a certain capacity for attention, so that a person can be turning on their left leg as the access point. The right leg and foot takes steps which are 360 degrees.
Does it have to be counterclockwise? Is it always counterclockwise?
It's always counterclockwise.
Okay.
Yes. Or it's almost always counterclockwise. And maybe that has something to do with the neutralizing of time.
Yes, exactly. I understand. From a physics point of view, we're looking at spiral dynamics, really. Yes.
And I don't know what physics would say about this, but our understanding is that to turn counterclockwise is to bring energies into this world.
Yes.
As an act of service.
It's a type of charging.
Yeah. So we're not doing this to take ourselves out of the world or specifically to reach some ecstasy to ascend. It really is an act of service. And in this act of service, you're turning with a group of people, so there's a choreography that one has to be aware of. There's also a heart relationship to the sheikh, who is just standing there as the transmission point for the lineage, holding a certain state of being, which traces back through all generations of sheikhs and back to Rumi and back to the Prophet Muhammad. So there's a lineage. The sheikh holds that lineage. The dervishes who are whirling are doing their best to be in heart contact with that lineage. They have one hand up, receiving, another hand down, transmitting through the heart. And it's a meditation in motion. It is coming to our inmost center, where we're closest to God, and experiencing that intimacy. And it's also a joining in community. It's worship, above all. It is reverencing the divine. It's an expression of beauty through a highly developed classical music, which gave birth to a great classical music tradition. It is also poetry is sung along with the music. And ultimately, a person moves through stages of consciousness deeper and deeper into that fifth stage of ecstatic union,
Yes.
which is the third salam, the third phase of movement. But then we come back into the fourth salam, or phase, which becomes very dignified, sober whirling, where the person who has lost, in a sense, lost their individuality briefly during the third stage, comes back and is given their individuality back, in a sense, in a new form, a new you, a new self is resurrected. And so there's that whole process. And then the ceremony ends. It ends at a point, all the dervishes will be turning. The music will be reduced to one simple instrument, improvising. And you hear the swishing of the robes and the feet in this silence and beautiful, subtle improvisation. And then suddenly, as if out of nowhere, you hear the recitation of the Quran. And particularly this verse, "To God belongs the East and the West, and wheresoever you turn is the face of God." And at that moment, all the dervishes stop. They put their hands over their shoulders. They become the number one, the letter Aleph, to testify to the oneness of God. And they kneel down on sheepskins, and they are ready to listen with a pure heart to the Quranic recitation. So everything leads up to that point. So it's a
very beautiful celebration.
Yeah.
Even though I understood very little of what I was doing, as with most of the people that were there, we certainly could feel it by way of that transmission. It was absolutely lovely,
There's
deepening experience.
There's some objective phenomena going on in the turning. And it's
Absolutely.
electromagnetic,
Yes.
because we're turning within the Earth's electromagnetic field, and we are an electromagnet ourselves.
It's a very pronounced feeling. I found it very enlivening, very soothing and ecstatic all at the same time, and very mind expanding. It was lovely.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this. At this time, we have various belief systems that are culminating in this sense of urgency. In the Christian tradition, it's a sense of an impending Armageddon. In the, for lack of a better word, I'll just say New Age communities or metaphysical communities, it would be a focus on the coming date of 2012 and the years surrounding that. Is there anything within the Islamic or Sufi tradition that is looking at these times as well as anything particularly unique?
I'll speak from my own experience and perception of this, because yes, there are end times statements and propositions in Islam. Whether they are authentic or not can be debated. But let me also say that Islam and Sufism particularly always has a sense of the apocalyptic, in the sense that the unveiling could happen every moment, as if the resurrection itself is possible here and now. So we live in that reality. That is our everyday reality. At the same time, when you look at the sweep of history, and you look at what is undeniable, the changes humanity has gone through in the last 100,000 years, when human speech developed, in the last 26,000 years, which, by the way, I don't know if anyone's noticed or commented, but 26,000 years ago is when the first portraits of human beings appeared.
I have not heard that. I have heard of various cave arts from 40,000 years ago, but not
Cave art is much
specifically
older,
toward the
but
portrait.
they're not faces, they're not portraits.
Yes, that's very true.
So
yeah.
26,000 years ago, human beings reached a certain level of self-awareness. And we ourselves were introduced into a lineage that actually is 26,000 years old. It has an oral tradition 26,000 years old. And my teacher, when I asked him, why 26,000 years? He looked at me like I was foolish and said, well, we keep track. But later I realized that something happened then. Before I knew about the precession of the equinox, I discovered on the cover of National Geographic a picture of the oldest known human face. It was 26,000 years.
Very interesting.
So anyway, I'm laying out scales of time.
Mm-hmm.
26,000 years, something's been going on. 5,000 years ago, recorded history. A few hundred years ago, 250, 300 years ago, industrialization, the shrinking of the world with steamships. In more recent times, the technology, and particularly now the internet and the whole technosphere that we're involved with, life has been incredibly intense in the last 11 years or so, for instance. There's a huge difference, it seems. And even more so, it seems, in recent years. So there's an intensification going on. It seems undeniable. What it will lead to, I don't know, but I do experience the intensification. I have a sense that we're coming to a new sense of time, just as in the Renaissance people developed a capacity for perspective in the three-dimensional space we live in, that we are opening up to something mystics have known and experienced, but a kind of perspective within time and a capacity to have a different relationship to time. And I also suspect that there is some shrinking between human intention and mind and manifestation.
Yes, it would seem
that
so.
Synchronicities are, the synchronicity dials being turned up.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, the significance of this to me is that it places a great responsibility on us to be aware and responsible for every thought and feeling. And so the spiritual solution here, or the spiritual need for these times, is to learn to rest in the divine, to trust the divine, to be so rooted in the divine that the intensification of time and the incredible bombardment with information and the intensity of life itself can be met from a still point within ourselves. And in that still point is, to really find that still point, it's not purely a mental phenomenon, it's not something you just think about. It has something to do with trust in the divine and surrender to the divine. And when we have that trust and surrender, and we know that what we are is essentially infinite, pure spirit and love, then we can act from that truth, and we can the examples